Cresselia is actually more like a berry specialist than it is a skill specialist. In fact, even if you use it as it is without a psychic team, it completely destroys Musharna in farming psychic berries. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive at Cresselia, we're going to look at its stats, we're going to look at its skill triggers, we're going to look at its berry output, and we're going to compare it to the likes of Gardevoir and Musharna. But unfortunately, comparing Cresselia is no easy task because of several problems. One is that its main skill is two main skills squished into one. And another is that its main skill power depends on, well, your team building. It depends on how many psychic Pokemon you've got or whether the rest of them are favorite berries or not. But I will do my best to try and break it down so that you guys can understand the different components of Cresselia. Some of the main questions we want to ask in this analysis is, well, first of all, for healing, is it as good or better or worse than a Gardevoir? Because, well, they're both psychic types and they both do healing. If I caught a really good Cresselia, should I switch from a Gardevoir? Or perhaps, do we need both because Cresselia is a little bit stronger if Gardevoir is on the team? And the other question is, how good is Cresselia at producing berries? Because that's the other part of its main skill. First, let's take a look at its stats. Cresselia is a snoozing type Pokemon, it's a skill specialist by name, but we're about to find out, by production, it's more like a berry specialist. It has a really good speed. I mean, compared to other psychic types, it's one of the highest. Even Gardevoir is 40 minutes base speed, Cresselia goes down to 38 minutes. But in terms of berry output, it's actually a little worse than Gardevoir because it has a much higher ingredient rate at 24%, Gardevoir at 15%. The most interesting part is its main skill, Lunar Blessing. Lunar Blessing is a two-part skill. The first part is the Energy for Everyone S. And the second part is what we used to call a modifier, although I don't know if that's the right term for it anymore. In other skills, this first part modifies the skill inside the brackets, and I guess it kind of does, but in this scenario, it adds another skill. So in this case, it's like a modifier and an additive. And a side note is, for the first time, Mr. Mime's skill copy, actually copies the entire skill, Lunar Blessing and Energy for Everyone, not just whatever's inside the brackets. For other skills, skill copy only copies what's inside the brackets. So before the modifier. This is both good and a bad thing. Why bad? Well, because this skill itself actually heals less than the original Energy for Everyone. In fact, at level 6, we're talking about 40% less energy healing compared to Gardevoir. Healing only 11 energy for every team member when the regular Energy for Everyone heals 18. Now, the healing part doesn't depend on how many psychic types you have on your team. It's a pretty straightforward addition to the Energy for Everyone on the team. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if the skill trigger rate of Cresselia is really high compared to Gardevoir, right? If Cresselia triggers 40% more, then it will be just as good a healer as Gardevoir. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The number we're comparing is how many skill triggers in 24 hours. If they have no stats at all, Cresselia farms about 4.18 triggers every 24 hours, whereas Gardevoir farms 4.11 triggers. So Cresselia is just a tiny bit better than Gardevoir in the skill triggers if they have the same stats, but Cresselia gives you 40% less energy, which is a real concern if you normally have energy deficiencies. So the first conclusion here is that Cresselia does not replace Gardevoir as a healer, unless for some reason this amount of healing is enough for you. You just have like the most broken stats on Cresselia, and for some reason you can manage your energy very well throughout the day. That 11 energy is enough for you to keep your team above 80% energy all day. We know that anything above 80% farms at the same rate. The moment you fall below 80%, your Pokemon will then start farming slower. So naturally, the next question is, does the other part of its skill make up for the losses in healing? The part that says it gets berries from itself and its team members. This berry component is quite similar to Berry Burst, where when it triggers, all the berries that are farmed are immediately fed to Snorlax. You don't have to collect them, and there are no ingredients farmed, unlike Helper Boost. So it's not like Helper Boost where ingredients can be farmed and you can choose not to collect collect the berries and ingredients, leading to techniques like overstacking by building your berries into a new week. You can't do that with Berry Burst or Lunar Blessing. And also one other distinguishing feature is that Berry Burst doesn't depend on whether your other Pokemon have berry finding or whether they're berry specialists. No matter how many berries those team members farm, it will take 1 berry from them. At level 1, at level 6 it might take 5 berries per team member, but it depends on the skill. The only similarity about Lunar Blessing to Helper Boost is that just like Helper Boost, it depends on how many of the same type species are on the team. So the more different psychic type Pokemon you have on the team, the stronger that berry output. If your entire team are made up of 5 different psychic type Pokemon, including Cresselia itself, then the skill is the strongest. But having a full psychic team can come at a cost, because by forcing a psychic team, you might be giving up on certain ingredients that you need for dishes, or you might be giving up on certain skills you need to expand pot or Tasty Chance S, etc. And the other factor this skill depends on is the skill level. Just like all other main skills, the higher the skill level, the stronger the skill. But otherwise, it works just like Berry Burst. It will farm a certain number of berries from itself. So at level 6, which will be the focus of this video, it will farm 25 psychic berries. And then, if you have no other psychic types on the team, you'll farm 1 berry from each of the other Pokemon on the team. If you, for some reason, only have Cresselia on the team, then it will farm nothing from the other team members. And how many berries it can actually farm can vary a lot. At lowest, it can farm only 5 berries from itself and 1 from each team member. At most, 32 from itself and then 9 from each member. The each member part excludes itself. And of course, this skill is strongest if you happen to be on a favorite berry week. So for example, you're at Lapis Lakeside where psychic berries are guaranteed to be favorite. And while this skill would be a little weaker if you had no psychic species on the team except Cresselia itself, so you're only at 1 psychic species, if the rest of the team members are still favorite berry despite not being psychic types. So at Lapis Lakeside, let's say you've got Primeape and Meganium, who are both also favorite berries. At the very least, this skill still provides you with more strength because other team members are still providing favorite berries. So the numbers that I'm going to show you in a moment can vary a lot depending on which favorite berries that we're talking about. But what I'd like to do is focus on only 1 species. So let's assume that you can't run a full psychic team. Let's ignore everything from here onwards to not only simplify the situation, but what you'll see in a moment is that even at only 1 species, Cresselia can be quite strong. So anything above it is just a bonus. So that means anyone can apply the numbers in this analysis, because at the very least, Cresselia can just be used by itself without a psychic team. We will focus on level 6 only because just like other skill specialists, it's really only powerful at the max skill level. Now for the analysis, I'll start by using production comparison in the Rainix calculator, but you got to be very careful about how you do this. Because if you actually look at the numbers, production comparison assumes that you have a full psychic team. So it values Cresselia at its maximum output potential. So the number represented here for its skill triggered berry output is not that accurate. If you want an accurate analysis, you've got 2 options. One is you go to team analysis so that you can look at your Pokemon and how it compares. Alternatively, you can open the advanced options and give it some team members, but do be careful that this can affect other Pokemon in your production comparison as well. Now, just for simplicity, I'll be adding Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, and Pikachu as its 4 other members. The fact that they're not fully evolved and their different specialties don't actually matter. In production comparison, they are however assumed to be level 60, so the berries they farm will be at the level 60 strength. And now you can see the psychic berries have gone down a lot, because before I did the advanced option, it was over 200 berries because it assumed every team member is psychic type, and also the skill gets better when there are more psychic type Pokemon. But instead, you see the berries of the other 4 Pokemon. Now, as we already said, Gardevoir does better healing than Cresselia, 40% more. And despite having no psychic Pokemon on the team, Cresselia in total farms almost 3 times the amount of total strength compared to Gardevoir. So if healing is not a concern, Cresselia is way better at producing strength than Gardevoir, which makes sense because Gardevoir is a skill specialist, but then so is Cresselia, and now you can see where I'm going about this berry output. So the next question is, how does it compare to a true berry specialist that's Musharna? Now we're gonna be a bit unfair and actually ignore Dream Shard Magnet. To be fair, if you want to use Dream Shard Magnet, choose a different Pokemon, choose an actual skill specialist. I know that Musharna does have a reasonable skill output despite not being a skill specialist for Dream Shard Magnet, but it simply wouldn't be worth your main skill seeds. You should just use a Dream Shard Magnet skill specialist for Dream Shards. If you happen to have skill level up, that's fine as well. That will be better than skill trigger on Musharna, assuming that you're not going to invest any main seeds. So unfair as it may be, we're only looking at the strength output from Musharna's berries and maybe looking at a bit of its ingredients as well. These numbers are at level 60, and unfortunately, Musharna is absolute trash. It farms only 14,000 strength in 24 hours. While Cresselia farms 8,000 strength from its normal berries without the skill output, if you consider collecting all of its skill, and it shouldn't be too hard to collect all of its skills because it doesn't trigger that often, but when it does, it triggers and gives you a lot. It's not like Charge Strength S where you gotta keep collecting like every hour to make sure you get every trigger for it to be good. So low trigger amounts but strong power is actually better. Just means you're going to miss those triggers a little less. And assuming that you are going to collect every trigger, its Psychic Berries at level 6 main skill with no Psychic team gives it 11,000 in strength. You add that onto its normal Psychic Berry production, that's already 19,000, already more than Musharna. And of course you get all these other berries as well, which provide some strength. In this specific example, because of the lack of Psychic team members, these numbers are actually quite small, but still significant. We're looking at about 2,000 strength on top of all of that. So if we also include ingredient strength, which by the way is stronger on Cresselia, also thanks to its really good speed, in total 28,000 strength compared to Musharna's only 18,000. Now you might be wondering, well, for berry specialists we should actually give them berry finding S. So Musharna would have an extra berry. But if we were to make this a fair comparison and give both Cresselia and Musharna berry finding S, actually Cresselia outperforms Musharna even more. And again, that's to do with its really high speed. If you remember the concept of dual specialists, we often talk about those when a Pokemon has really high speed, Pokemon like Gengar who have high speed, but is an ingredient specialist. But because of how high its speed is, if you give it berry finding, which is not a ratio change, it is an absolute increase in berry production, a +1 increase. Gengar closes the gap on Banette, the berry specialist of ghost types, if they both have berry finding. Now, in this scenario, giving berry finding to Cresselia actually pulls it further away from Musharna because of its high speed. So let's take a look. Where Cresselia was about 8,000 in berry strength before, it is now 16,000 for its natural berry output, not the skill output. Musharna now farms 21,000. So without berry finding, the difference in strength is about 10,500. With berry finding on both, the difference is now 11,500 because of the relative change in the berry output being better for Cresselia. So the argument about berry finding actually works in Cresselia's favor. Now, in case you were wondering, and let's say you don't have a lot of main seeds, at which point does Cresselia cross over Musharna in berry output? I estimated it to be about level 2 main skill. So at level 2 main skill, you can see that Cresselia is still a little better than Musharna in overall strength output. But its berry output in total, including all the skill triggers, is about the same. If you add up all the berry strength from the skills and also its natural berries, it will be about the same as Musharna. So you only need to invest one main skill seed to beat Musharna. But maybe that's a problem of Musharna not being very good, not necessarily that Cresselia being broken. So naturally, the next thing we want to compare is better berry specialists, maybe Meganium, since Cresselia and Meganium both work at Lakeside better, being favorite berries. Let's take Musharna away and see what happens when we compare to Meganium, one of the better berry specialists in the game. Now you can see that the strengths are a lot closer to each other. Cresselia at 28,000 in total strength compared to Meganium at about 25,000. But what I haven't done is I haven't given it a fair comparison because Meganium here is only farming at level 3 charge strength. If we give Meganium a max skill level, then Meganium does outperform Cresselia if Cresselia doesn't have any psychic Pokemon on the team. So while Cresselia is the top tier berry specialist for psychic berries, it doesn't outperform the top tier berry specialists in this game. But what would happen if I now start giving it some psychic Pokemon in its team? So let's remove Pikachu and put in, say, Gardevoir, because again, Gardevoir is a commonly used Pokemon. What you might notice is that the other berries, so ignore the psychic for now, the other 3 berries doubled in strength. Why did it double? Well, because at 2 species, you get 2 from each member as opposed to 1 from each team member. Therefore, you get double the amount of berries from the other team members, and it quickly becomes 4 times once you have 3 species. But not forgetting that itself also farms more berries as there are more species on the team. So at which point does Cresselia overtake Meganium? Meganium's berry output is about 16 to 17,000, which Cresselia's skill already matches. It's just that with a very high skill level, that's actually a significant contribution to the total strength. So Meganium farms an additional 13,000 in this situation, which Cresselia isn't able to keep up with. Of course, if you don't invest any main seeds into Meganium, actually Cresselia would be better at this point. So let's dumb it back down to level 3 main skill. You can quickly see that difference is that again Cresselia is just a lot better. So if you've invested your main seeds in Cresselia but not Meganium, then Cresselia remains to be the Pokemon of choice. But again, let's make a fair comparison. We'll give Meganium max skill level. At 2 psychic species, so a Gardevoir on the team, they nearly match each other in their total strength. So let's put in a 3rd species. Let's say you happen to need tomatoes, so you're running Mr. Mime with a mono tomato for whatever salad that you're cooking. Well, now Cresselia clearly overtakes Meganium. So you only need 2 additional psychic Pokemon on the team for Cresselia itself to be better than Meganium. And then if you have a full psychic team, Cresselia outperforms Meganium and top berry specialists by a lot. It's just not that realistic to be expecting to run a full team of psychic Pokemon all the time, especially when you need that ingredient coverage. But at the very least, Espeon and Gardevoir both make sense as generalists. Mr. Mime will be situational, and Musharna is the awkward one because itself actually nerfs your team when you could be using, say, Meganium instead in its place. And yes, Musharna is actually that bad because if you look at level 60 Musharna, it only produces about half the strength of Meganium at max skill level. Again, we're not valuing Musharna's skill. But to Musharna's credit, we should consider the extra strength that it gives to Cresselia by being a team member as its own strength. So what do I mean by that? Let's again take a look at Cresselia without any psychic team members. So again, I'm running the Kanto starter Pokemon here. And Cresselia farms about 28,000 strength. Its skill strength is nearly 14,000. If we now swap out one of the Pokemon for Musharna, or it can be any psychic Pokemon, it doesn't really matter which one, it will give you the same number, it now farms about 17,000. So by having Musharna on the team, it makes Cresselia's skill output about 20% better. So if we take that 3 extra thousand and actually give it to Musharna for a better comparison, Musharna sits at about 21,000 strength, because that strength that Cresselia got wouldn't have existed if it weren't for Musharna. But even then, giving Musharna that 21,000 strength, giving it the benefit of the doubt, it's still worse than whatever Meganium is farming. And again, if we bring Meganium back to level 3 main skill, yes, it's still worse. So between Musharna and Meganium in a team with Cresselia, Meganium is actually better. Once again, to be absolutely sure, you actually need to look at the numbers for your own account. And I would recommend that you use team analysis instead of production comparison, because that'll give you actual raw numbers of your Pokemon in the specific team that you've designed. So what you would do is put in a team of 5 Pokemon and see what Cresselia outputs, and then copy that team, select the new team, and make some changes in your team. So let's say now I want to run Musharna instead of running Meganium. Well, what is my total strength output? So with Musharna, it's 932,000 in total strength for this team. The initial team using Meganium is 1.1 million. So in team analysis, you get a much more accurate analysis. The reason I don't often use team analysis, the moment you put skills like helping bonus or anything that actually helps support other species, then you can't see the Pokemon strength in isolation anymore. Production comparison allows me to only look at the strength supplied by that one Pokemon, not affected by the team. So hopefully this video has allowed you to understand that Cresselia is really good, in fact the best at psychic berry farming, better than Musharna. So between the two, you would use Cresselia if you've got the main skill seeds. If you happen to be running more psychic Pokemon on the team for whatever reason, like Espeon and Gardevoir, then Cresselia can even outdo Meganium. Of course, if Cresselia is not favorite berry, but something else is, so for example we're at Cyan Beach and Feraligatr is favorite berry, Feraligatr will still do much better, so don't try to force use Cresselia. Having said that, the berry output didn't consider the healing aspect of Cresselia, so there's a lot to be said about the strength provided by Cresselia in terms of the healing that's provided. And yes, even if we set Cyan Beach as the favorite berry, so only Feraligatr benefits from that, yes, Cresselia does get some of those water berries because of its main skill, but not a lot. The portion of the favorite berries farmed from its team members is actually quite small compared to the berries it farms of itself, the Mago psychic berries. So don't count on the fact that Cresselia can farm some favorite berries from Feraligatr. Itself really needs to have favorite berry for it to be top tier. So that all sounds really good. The main drawbacks of Cresselia? Well, you need it to have berry finding, skill trigger, you need some really good stats on it to consider investing. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just hunt a really good berry specialist of every other type except Musharna to do your berry coverage for all of the different areas? And indeed, the last thing we're now going to look at is what stats actually work for Cresselia. We mentioned berry finding, but what about skill trigger? Which one's actually better? Let's compare. I gave one Cresselia berry finding and another Cresselia skill trigger M. Because of that doubling of the berry finding from its natural berries, the one with the berry finding farms a lot more strength, around 25% more strength than the one that only has skill trigger M. Think of it this way, berry finding doubles the amount of berries that Cresselia farms. Skill trigger only gives about 36% more of the skill trigger's berries farmed. So it just makes a lot of sense that berry finding is better, but skill trigger gives you more healing at the same time, which I've not included in this. So they're both good skills, they just do slightly different things. Ideally, you would have both and helping bonus. So again, the main drawbacks of Cresselia is you kinda need berry finding, if not at least have helping bonus and skill trigger and all the other good stuff. And the other drawbacks, of course, is that it's expensive to catch. Are you going to use your master biscuit now that the event is over? It's just going to be difficult to even find one to begin with, being a legendary. And the fact that it still doesn't beat a proper berry specialist in their respective areas. So will you drop all your main skill seeds in order to have mainly Mago berry coverage, the psychic berry coverage, instead of using Musharna? So it all sounds great, but to me, the cost is still just a little too high. They haven't made main skill seeds a lot easier to farm, especially for those free-to-play players. And until they do, Cresselia will probably sit in the box for most regular or free-to-play players.